Hello and welcome to another episode of CS Story. Today I want to talk a bit about the differences between CS in the Arctic and the Antarctic. I got the question whether there's actually any differences in the ice between the Arctic and the Antarctic. So, well, as you know, the Arctic is at the North Pole and then the Antarctic is close to the South Pole. So there you would expect there are some differences in the ice because they are just located at two opposite ends of our planet. And yes, there are actually quite some differences between the ice, despite they might look very similar from an optical point of view uh, in in your eyes when you see a video. So here come 5 big differences between Arctic and Antarctic ice. So the first big difference is in the variability. So in Antarctica, basically the entire sea ice is melting each year. There's only very little sea ice that is surviving the summer melt in Antarctica. Only in some parts of the Central Weddell Sea and the Ross Sea there's a bit of sea ice surviving. However, in the Arctic there's a much bigger piece of ice that is remaining. So typically in the Arctic there is a lot more multi-year ice than in or old ice than in Antarctica. This is changing a little bit with climate change, but still ice in the Arctic can get older than in the Antarctic. The second big difference is obviously the temperature of the air. So we all know that at the poles it's cold, but for some reasons that we don't discuss today, the air temperature in the Arctic is usually much warmer. Well, that doesn't mean it's warm there, but it's warmer than in the Antarctic. So sea ice can actually melt a lot from the top in the Arctic. While in Antarctica, because it's a very enclosed system that is far away from everywhere of the rest of our planet, and the currents are going around Antarctica, isolating it from the airflows of the rest of the planet, the air in Antarctica is significantly colder, and that basically means that sea ice in the Antarctic is not really much melting from the top, but because of the heat of the ocean, it's mostly melting from the bottom. And that is already one of, or third big difference. So in these differences cause that in the Arctic, in summer we have big accumulations of meltwater, these blue melt ponds that you see in these pictures, that accumulate on the ice, and we basically don't have these features in the Antarctic. In the Antarctic, however, because it doesn't really melt completely, we have a lot more snow on the ice, and that leads to peculiarities. So that actually over the time, some of the snow is transformed into ice because of some melting happening, but the surface never really melting completely. Then there is the fourth difference between ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and that is during the processes of ice formation. So we already said that Antarctica is surrounded by a big ocean, and the ice is growing in this big ocean. That means there is a lot of winds, there's a lot of waves. So ice is growing in a very turbulent regime. That means that the majority of ice, fresh ice growth in the Antarctic is actually growing in a turbulent wave field. And that means that the ice looks a bit different at the start. So in the Arctic you have very calm situation, and that means that the ice is growing as a homogeneous flat sheet, which we call nihilus. But in the Antarctic, the ice crystals are actually bumped into each other by the waves, and the formation goes over a stage that is called pancake ice. And why is it called pancake ice? Well, actually because it looks like pancakes. So, and then there's of course another very important difference, which for me now is the fifth difference between sea ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic. And that is that in the Arctic you have polar bears. And polar bears are very curious and not necessarily very safe to be around. So it's something for us researchers to keep in mind when you're in the Arctic and you're working. You should always keep watch and be prepared for meeting a bear. While in the Antarctic, yeah, there's not so much. There's a lot of cute penguins jumping around on the ice that might be overly curious and investigate you, but they are not dangerous. So, working on the ice in the Antarctic can be much more relaxed because you can just walk away from the ship without a rifle or without any precautions, and it's nobody's gonna be eating you. So I hope that these were some interesting differences for you in the sea ice between the Arctic and the Antarctic. And with that, I thank you a lot for watching and have a nice day.